Chapter 1, The Last 6 Minutes. Sunday, December 13th, 2009. 11:54 a.m. A white Chevrolet Cavalier rolls into a cul-de-sac at the end of Savannah Springs Avenue in Henderson, Nevada. The car belongs to 30-year-old Steven Koecher, and a residential security camera captures the moment he parks it there, in a retirement community called Sun City Anthem, a manicured 55-plus neighborhood where retirees play golf and the HOA enforces strict landscaping rules. 6 minutes later, the same camera records a figure in a white dress shirt and dark slacks walking away from the vehicle, something tucked under his arm that looks like a manila folder or portfolio. The man moves with purpose, not wandering, not lost. He crosses the street, walks north past another house, and disappears from the frame. Steven Koecher was never seen again. That December morning began like so many others for Steven, uncertain, stretched thin, looking for work. He was 3 months behind on rent in St. George, Utah, where he'd moved earlier that year to escape the brutal Salt Lake winters he'd endured as a newspaper journalist. Steven had worked the overnight shift at the Salt Lake Tribune's online edition until exhaustion forced him to quit in 2008. After that, gigs dried up fast. By late 2009, the Great Recession had gutted newsrooms and classified ad revenue across America. Steven, a college-educated writer with a degree in mass communications from the University of Utah, was grinding through temp jobs and freelance stringer work, anything to stay afloat. 3 days before he vanished, Steven had driven to Ruby Valley, Nevada, hoping to visit his ex-girlfriend at her parents' ranch. She wasn't there. He told her parents he was planning to continue west to Sacramento to see family, but bad weather might force him to turn back. He stayed for lunch, left 2 hours later, and drove back toward Utah. On the morning of December 13th, a friend from his LDS congregation in St. George texted, asking Steven to lead Sunday services. Steven replied that he was in the Las Vegas area and couldn't make it. The friend didn't ask why. Nothing seemed unusual about the exchange. But what Steven was doing in Henderson that Sunday, alone, dressed for an appointment, parking in a neighborhood where he knew no one, remains a mystery. Inside his abandoned Cavalier, investigators later found Christmas gifts he'd purchased just days earlier, still wrapped. A shaving kit. Coats, pillows, blankets. The kinds of things you bring when you're living out of your car or preparing for a long trip. His laptop, phone charger, and passport were back at his rental in St. George. His wallet, driver's license, and cell phone vanished with him. Here's where the case stops making sense. At 5 p.m. that afternoon, almost 5 hours after Steven walked out of camera range, his cell phone pinged a tower 10 miles northeast of Sun City Anthem, near the intersection of Arroyo Grande Boulevard and American Pacific Drive. 2 hours later, at 7 p.m., it pinged again, this time from a tower near Whitney Ranch, 2 miles farther north. Early the next morning, December 14th, someone checked Steven's voicemail. The phone signal hit a tower near Interstate 515, and Russell Road, another 2 miles north. For the next 2 days, Steven's phone remained in that area, pinging the same tower repeatedly, until the battery died on December 16th. Steven's car wasn't discovered until December 17th, when his landlord in St. George couldn't reach him and contacted his parents. By then, 4 days had passed. Surveillance footage showed Steven walking away from his car alone, apparently by choice. But his phone told a different story, one that suggested movement, distance, maybe even someone else. If Steven left that retirement community on foot at noon, how did his phone end up 10 miles away by evening? And who checked his voicemail the next morning while the phone traveled steadily northward, mile by mile, toward the interstate? In America, we trust our technology to tell the truth. Cell tower data is used to convict killers and exonerate the innocent. But in Steven Koecher's case, the phone pings didn't clarify anything, they deepened the confusion. Because the route those signals traced didn't lead back to Utah, or to Sacramento, or to anywhere Steven had reason to be. It led north through Henderson's sprawl, toward Las Vegas, in a pattern that suggested someone, or something, was carrying that phone in the opposite direction from where Steven had parked his car. And that's the question no one has answered in over 15 years. Was Steven Koecher walking toward something that Sunday morning, or away from it? Chapter 2, The 525-Mile Question. Steven Koecher was not the kind of person who disappeared. His family would tell you that first. Devout LDS, Big Brother volunteer, former missionary who'd spent 2 years in Brazil learning Portuguese and spreading the gospel. No criminal record, no drinking, no drugs. The kind of guy who showed up early to church and stayed late to help fold chairs. His younger brother Dallin idolized him. His parents trusted him completely. But by December 2009, Steven was drowning, and no one could see the water. The Great Recession had gutted the American job market, and Utah wasn't spared. When Steven quit his overnight shift at the Salt Lake Tribune in 2008, exhausted, burned out, he figured he'd land something else quickly. He was wrong. By spring 2009, he'd moved south to St. George, chasing better weather and lower rent, and found temp work with a local business called Travis Window and Blind Cleaning. The owner was generous enough, but it wasn't journalism. It wasn't what Steven had trained for. In November, he picked up another gig distributing flyers for a car wash, minimum wage, no benefits, the kind of work that pays rent only if you're lucky. By December, Steven was 3 months behind on that rent, $1,500 owed to his landlord, Brett Bishop, who'd been patient but was now calling Steven's father directly to discuss the debt. Let's pause here, because this is where American expectations collide with reality. Steven was 30 years old, college-educated, and single, an anomaly in LDS culture, where marriage by 25 is the norm. His siblings and cousins had all settled down, started families, built careers. Steven had done none of those things. Friends speculated he felt the weight of those unmet milestones, some whispered darker theories about identity and orientation, though nothing was ever confirmed. What we know for certain is that Steven's mother, Deanne, later said her son seemed depressed in those final weeks. His father, Rolf, offered him money to cover rent. Steven refused, insisting he'd handle it himself. Pride, or shame, or both. His grandmother sent a check. Steven never cashed it. His mother deposited money in his account on December 11th. Steven never touched that either. Now, Thursday, December 10th, 2009. Early morning, still dark. Steven climbed into his white Chevy Cavalier and drove north on Interstate 15 towards Salt Lake City, a 4-hour trip. He stopped for gas, used his debit card, kept moving. Then west on I-80 to West Wendover, Nevada, another fuel stop. Then south into the high desert, 100 miles of sagebrush and sky, to the Ruby Valley ranch of the Neff family. Steven had dated their daughter, Anne-Marie, years earlier. She wasn't there. The Neffs invited him in anyway, served lunch, chatted for 2 hours. Steven told them he was on his way to Sacramento to visit family, but bad weather might force him to turn back. The Neffs wished him well. He left around 1 p.m., heading east. Here's the problem: Steven had no family in Sacramento. Zero. His sister confirmed it later: no relatives, no friends, no reason to go there. So why lie to the Neffs? And why drive 300 miles north to Ruby Valley in the first place, hoping an ex-girlfriend who hadn't seen him in years would suddenly be available? Steven was burning gas he couldn't afford, putting miles on a car already packed with blankets and Christmas gifts, drifting across Nevada like a man looking for something he couldn't name. He made it back to St. George that night, late. Friday, December 11th, he spoke with his mother on the phone. She noted he sounded cheerful, surprisingly upbeat given the circumstances. That afternoon, Steven met with his LDS bishop, who mentioned a potential job opening. Steven seemed optimistic, the bishop recalled. On Saturday, December 12th, Steven drove an hour north to Mesquite, Nevada. No one knows why. He returned that night, stopped somewhere to buy a baby bib and cookies as Christmas gifts for his brother. Inside his apartment, more wrapped presents were waiting. Sunday morning, December 13th. A friend from Steven's congregation texted, asking him to lead services. Steven replied, "I'm in the Vegas area, can't make it." The friend didn't press for details. Nothing seemed unusual about the exchange. Except Steven was 140 miles from St. George, alone in a retirement community, dressed for an appointment no one ever scheduled. And 6 minutes after he parked his car at 11:54 a.m., he walked away carrying what looked like a folder full of papers. The surveillance camera captured that moment, the last confirmed sighting of Steven Koecher alive. But it also captured something else, something investigators didn't release to the public for years: an SUV following Steven down the street, just out of frame. Whether it picked him up, or passed him by, or turned around and left, no one knows. What we do know is that by 5 p.m. that afternoon, Steven's phone was 10 miles northeast, pinging a tower near Arroyo Grande Boulevard. And by the next morning, someone checked his voicemail while the phone traveled steadily north, mile by mile, toward Interstate 515. Steven's car sat undisturbed on Savannah Springs Avenue for 4 days before anyone noticed. Inside, a shaving kit, coats, pillows, blankets, Christmas gifts, and a window washing flyer that eventually led police back to his family. No wallet. No phone. No Steven. Just the question that's haunted his father, Rolf, for over 15 years. We've got hundreds of clues that tell us what it isn't, but not one that tells us what it is. Why was Steven Koecher in Henderson, Nevada, on December 13, 2009? And where did he go after he walked out of frame? Sunday, December 13, 2009, 12 p.m. Steven Koecher's white Cavalier sits alone at the end of Savannah Springs Avenue, engine cooling, windows up, nothing unusual. In Sun City Anthem, retirees live by schedules: golf at 9, bridge at 2, dinner at 5. No one notices an extra car in a cul-de-sac. Not yet. Monday, December 14th. The Cavalier is still there. At 6:42 a.m., someone checks Steven's voicemail. His landlord Brett Bishop had called, asking about overdue rent. The phone signal hits a tower near Interstate 515, and Russell Road, 10 miles north of the abandoned car. Whoever accessed that voicemail wasn't standing next to the Cavalier. They were moving. Tuesday, December 15th. The car hasn't moved. Neighbors walk dogs past it. Mail carriers deliver envelopes to identical beige houses. The Cavalier blends in, unremarkable, except it's been 3 days now and no one's come back for it. Sun City Anthem is an age-restricted community, 55 and older, and the Homeowners Association takes pride in keeping the streets clean. Abandoned vehicles don't belong here. Wednesday, December 16th. The HOA Parking Authority finally takes notice. They approach the Cavalier, peer through the windows, see wrapped Christmas gifts on the back seat, a shaving kit, blankets, pillows. No driver. No note. No explanation. Inside the car, they find flyers from Travis Window and Blind Cleaning in St. George, Utah, with a phone number printed on them. The HOA calls the number. Steven's boss answers, gives them Steven's cell phone number. The HOA leaves a voicemail on Steven's phone about the abandoned car. No one calls back. By now, Steven's phone battery is dead. It pinged its last tower signal somewhere near Russell Road on December 16th. For 3 days, the phone traveled steadily north through Henderson, not south toward St. George, not west toward California, but north toward the Vegas sprawl. Then silence. Thursday, December 17th, 10 a.m. The HOA escalates. They contact Steven's mother, Deanne Koecher, leaving a message about the car. She doesn't hear it until later that day. When she does, panic sets in. Steven hadn't answered his phone in days. He'd missed church. He'd vanished. Deanne and her husband Rolf drive 4 hours from their home in Bountiful, Utah, to Henderson, Nevada. By evening, they're standing in the cul-de-sac, staring at their son's car. Gas tank half full. Engine fine. Christmas presents still wrapped in the back. Rolf opens the door. Inside, no wallet, no phone, no Steven. Just the Christmas gifts their son had bought at Kmart 2 days before he disappeared. They file a missing person report with Henderson Police that night. In America, adults have the right to disappear. Police can't force someone to come home if they left voluntarily. And the surveillance footage from December 13th showed Steven walking away from his car alone, purposefully, without distress. No signs of struggle. No visible coercion. Just a man in a dress shirt and slacks, carrying a folder, walking north. But Henderson PD doesn't have jurisdiction over what happened before Steven entered Nevada. St. George, Utah, where Steven lived, is 125 miles away across state lines. That means 2 police departments, 2 states, 2 separate case files. In America, jurisdictional boundaries complicate investigations. Evidence gathered in Nevada might not transfer cleanly to Utah, and vice versa. If Steven walked out of Henderson and into the desert, whose case is it? If he was picked up by someone and driven back to Utah, does Henderson keep investigating? The bureaucracy slows everything down. By Friday, December 18th, Steven's family launches a public appeal. They hold a press conference on the steps of Henderson City Hall with dozens of relatives who drove in from Utah. Rolf and Deanne stand before cameras, exhausted, pleading. Deanne tells reporters, "We'd like to have everyone who's aware of this keep their eyes out for us, and we'd be thrilled to death to have someone take that $10,000 because we found our son." The family announces a reward. A week of vigilance. Search parties comb the desert around Sun City Anthem. They find nothing. Henderson police review the surveillance footage again and again. 2 cameras caught Steven. The first, at 11:54 a.m., shows his car pulling into the cul-de-sac. The second, 6 minutes later at 12 p.m., captures a figure walking away, something tucked under his arm. Then a third piece of footage, not widely publicized, a garage camera on an adjacent street catches Steven's reflection as he walks north. And then, something else. An SUV following him down the street, just out of frame. Did it stop? Did Steven get in? No one knows. The footage cuts off. Here's what investigators couldn't explain: if Steven walked away from his car alone, on foot, at noon in the desert, where did he go? Sun City Anthem is suburban sprawl, houses, golf courses, strip malls. No bus stops nearby. No rideshare in 2009. Just miles of pavement and 60-degree December heat. And yet his phone pinged 10 miles away by 5 p.m. You can't walk 10 miles in 5 hours in dress shoes carrying a folder and not be seen by someone. Someone gave Steven a ride. Or took him. Rolf Koecher later told reporters, "We've got hundreds of clues that tell us what it isn't, but not one that tells us what it is." By Christmas 2009, Steven had been missing 12 days. His wrapped gifts sat unopened in evidence. His apartment in St. George remained exactly as he'd left it, clothes folded, food in the fridge, diary on the desk. No suicide note. No goodbye. Just an empty chair at the family table and a question that still echoes 15 years later: why was Steven Koecher in Sun City Anthem on December 13, 2009? Chapter 4, The Man at the Door. December 13, 2009, 11:58 a.m. For minutes after parking his Cavalier, Steven Koecher walks up a driveway and rings a doorbell. A neighbor opens the door, sees a man in a white dress shirt, slacks, something tucked under his arm. The neighbor later told police what Steven said in that brief exchange, and it's haunted investigators ever since. "I need money." That's what the neighbor remembered. 3 words, delivered matter-of-factly, not panicked, not desperate. Steven stood on the doorstep of a stranger's home in a retirement community where he knew no one, asking for cash. The neighbor said no, or maybe didn't respond at all, accounts vary, and shut the door. By the time they looked again, Steven was already crossing the street, walking where there wasn't a sidewalk, heading north. 6 minutes total, from parking to disappearance. That's the window. Here's the problem: some witnesses recall Steven saying, "Do you need some money?" Not "I need money." The difference is everything. If Steven was offering money, maybe he was there to collect a debt, or pay someone, or deliver something, a transaction gone wrong. If he was asking for money, he was broke, stranded, maybe fleeing something. Henderson police interviewed the neighbor multiple times. The neighbor requested anonymity and stayed out of the media for over a decade before finally speaking in 2022. Why the silence? What else did they see? In America, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable. Memory degrades, details blur, witnesses fill gaps unconsciously. But this neighbor was one of the last people to see Steven Koecher alive, and their account is the only direct interaction we have. No one else on Savannah Springs Avenue reported seeing Steven that day. No one else heard him knock. No one else spoke to him. Except maybe someone did. Because shortly after Steven walked away from that doorstep, a garage security camera on an adjacent street caught his reflection moving north. And then, this is the part police didn't release for years, surveillance footage shows an SUV following Steven down the street, just out of frame. Did it stop? Did Steven get in? The footage cuts off before we see. By December 18, Henderson police had reviewed every available camera in Sun City Anthem. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocked on doors, asked residents if they'd seen anything unusual. Most hadn't. One neighbor told police another resident moved out the same day Steven disappeared, December 13. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe not. Police noted that one neighbor seemed nervous during interviews, deflecting questions, providing vague answers. They never named that person publicly. Here's where American policing differs from many other countries. Without a body, without evidence of a crime, without witnesses willing to testify, there's no case to prosecute. Henderson PD found no blood, no weapon, no signs of struggle. Steven's car was clean, no forced entry, no fingerprints that didn't belong to him. His bank accounts showed no suspicious activity after December 13. His phone pinged towers for 3 days, then went silent. That's not enough for a homicide investigation. It's barely enough for a missing person case. Steven's family refused to accept the simplest explanation: suicide. His mother, Deanne, told reporters her son had no history of mental illness, no suicidal ideation, no goodbye notes. His diary, found in his St. George apartment, mentioned only 2 concerns: finding a full-time job and finding a wife. He wrote about wanting to improve both in the new year. That's not the writing of someone planning to disappear. But others weren't so sure. Friends noted Steven seemed downtrodden in the weeks before he vanished, exhausted, financially strained, watching his siblings succeed while he struggled. The Great Recession had gutted his career prospects. He was 30 years old, single in a culture that prizes marriage, unemployed in a community that values self-sufficiency. Some theorized he drove to the mountains outside Henderson and walked into the desert to die. Search teams combed the hills for weeks, found nothing. Another theory: drugs. Steven's phone pinged near low-income apartments off Russell Road on December 14, a known area for narcotics trafficking in 2009. Maybe he owed money to dangerous people. Maybe he was buying, or selling, or caught in something he couldn't escape. But Steven had no history of drug use. No arrests, no rehab, no red flags. His autopsy, if one ever happens, would settle that question. But you need a body for an autopsy. Then there's the stranger theory: Steven left voluntarily to start over. Drove to Henderson, parked his car, walked away from his old life, reinvented himself somewhere no one would look. It happens: people vanish on purpose, shed identities, disappear into America's vast anonymity. But Steven left his Christmas gifts behind. He left his laptop, his passport, his clothes. He told his mother he'd be home for the holidays. That's not how you plan a new life. That's how you run from something immediate, urgent, terrifying. Henderson police officially classified the case as a missing person, not a homicide, not a suicide, just missing. 15 years later, that classification hasn't changed. No arrests. No suspects. No body. Just a white Cavalier in a cul-de-sac and a man who rang a doorbell asking for money, or offering it, before he walked into the desert and vanished. Rolf Koecher still searches. Every lead, every tip, every anonymous call. He's driven thousands of miles across Nevada, Utah, Arizona, looking for his son. He's posted flyers, offered rewards, pleaded on television. And every time someone asks what he thinks happened, he says the same thing: we've got hundreds of clues that tell us what it isn't, but not one that tells us what it is. So what did Steven Koecher say at that door? And where was he walking when he disappeared from view? Chapter 5: The Phone That Kept Moving. In America, your cell phone tells a story even when you don't. Every call, every text, every moment it sits idle in your pocket, it's pinging towers, leaving digital breadcrumbs that investigators can follow months or years later. Cell Site Location Information, or CSLI, has become one of law enforcement's most powerful tools. It's convicted murderers, exonerated the innocent, rewritten timelines. But it's also imperfect, probabilistic, dependent on variables like tower congestion, obstructions, weather. And in Steven Koecher's case, the phone records raised more questions than they answered. December 13, 2009, 5 p.m. 7 hours after Steven parked his Cavalier in Sun City, Anthem, his phone pinged a tower 10 miles northeast, near Arroyo Grande Boulevard and American Pacific Drive. This wasn't a wealthy neighborhood. This was working-class Henderson, apartment complexes, strip malls, auto repair shops. 2 hours later, at 7 p.m., the phone pinged again, this time from a tower 2 miles farther north, near Whitney Ranch. Steven, if it was Steven, was traveling steadily away from his car, moving deeper into the Las Vegas Valley. The next morning, December 14th, at 6:42 a.m., someone checked Steven's voicemail. His landlord, Brett Bishop, had left a message about overdue rent. Whoever accessed that voicemail was near Interstate 515 and Russell Road, another 2 miles north. The phone stayed in that area for 2 more days, pinging the same tower repeatedly, until the battery died on December 16th. The route traced a 10-mile path north through Henderson, in the opposite direction from Utah, from Sacramento, from anywhere Steven had reason to be. Here's the problem with cell tower data: it tells you where the phone was, not who was holding it. If Steven walked away from his car at noon on December 13th, alone and on foot, how did his phone end up 10 miles away by evening? The distance is too far to walk in 5 hours, especially in dress shoes, carrying papers, in desert heat. Someone gave him a ride, or took his phone. And whoever had that phone the next morning knew Steven's voicemail password well enough to check it. Steven's father, Rolf, hired private investigators Jim Burke and Kevin Wyatt to work the case pro bono. They've been at it for over a decade, chasing leads, interviewing witnesses, following digital trails. And they've landed on a theory that makes law enforcement uncomfortable: Steven was working as a courier. Not for a legitimate company, but for someone who needed packages moved quietly, no questions asked. The investigators focused on Brett Bishop, Steven's landlord. Bishop had a criminal history, arrests for possession of controlled substances, various misdemeanors pled down over the years. Steven's roommate, Jordan, later told investigators Bishop's behavior was bizarre. He claimed the duplex was a vacation home, but he was always there, poking around at odd hours. He carried a toiletry bag filled with prescription pills. He kept guns everywhere. When Steven fell 3 months behind on rent, Bishop didn't evict him, he called Steven's father directly, negotiating, stalling. Wyatt and Burke don't believe Bishop killed Steven. But they believe he knows why Steven was in Henderson that Sunday. Their hypothesis: Steven agreed to make a delivery, maybe prescription drugs, maybe something else, to settle his $1,500 debt. He drove to Henderson, met someone, and the transaction went wrong. Maybe Steven realized he was in over his head. Maybe he tried to back out. Maybe the people he was dealing with didn't give him that option. This theory explains the folder under Steven's arm, the dress clothes, the nervousness at the neighbor's door asking for money. It explains the phone pings moving steadily north toward Russell Road, a known area for drug activity in 2009. It explains why Steven lied to the Neffs about going to Sacramento, why he drove 300 miles out of his way to Ruby Valley 2 days earlier, why he seemed upbeat on the phone with his mother despite being broke and evicted. He thought he had a plan. He thought he'd settled his debt. He thought he'd be home for Christmas. But there's a darker explanation for those phone pings, one investigators don't like to discuss publicly. What if Steven wasn't holding the phone after he walked out of camera view? What if someone took it off his body, alive or dead, and drove it north to throw investigators off the trail? Cell tower triangulation works best when the phone is moving and making calls, not sitting idle in a car traveling highways. The pings show general direction, not precise location. If someone wanted to create a false trail, they could turn Steven's phone on periodically, let it ping a tower, then drive north and repeat. By the time the phone died on December 16, Steven could have been anywhere, buried in the desert, dumped in Lake Mead, driven back to Utah in a trunk. Then there's the absurd tangent that distracted investigators for months, Susan Powell. On December 6, 2009, 1 week before Steven vanished, Susan Cox Powell disappeared from her West Valley City, Utah home. Her husband, Josh Powell, claimed she left in the middle of the night. He later became the prime suspect in her murder, though her body was never found. In February 2010, Josh's father, Steven Powell, began publicly theorizing that Susan had run away to Brazil with Steven Koecher. Why? Because they were the same age, both LDS, both lived in Utah, both vanished around the same time. Josh even created a website outlining parallels between the two cases, complete with a 9-page report speculating Susan and Steven met secretly and fled the country. It was nonsense. Susan and Steven didn't know each other. Their families confirmed they'd never met. The timeline didn't match. Susan disappeared December 6, Steven was seen alive on December 13. But the Powell family kept pushing the theory anyway, desperate to deflect suspicion from Josh, who later killed himself and his 2 sons in a house fire. The damage was done. Investigators wasted time chasing a conspiracy that never existed, while real leads went cold. 15 years later, Henderson police still classify Steven's case as a missing person, not a homicide, despite the suspicious circumstances. Why? Because in American law, you need evidence of a crime. No body, no weapon, no witnesses, no confession. Just a phone that moved 10 miles north and a man who walked into the desert carrying a folder full of papers. Private investigators Burke and Wyatt believe Steven was definitely doing something for somebody else that Sunday. They just can't prove it. Rolf Koecher still searches. Every desert trail, every abandoned mine shaft, every unmarked grave. He's driven tens of thousands of miles across Nevada and Utah, following tips, chasing ghosts. And every time someone asks if Steven left voluntarily, Rolf points to the Christmas gifts still wrapped in the back seat. That's not how you start a new life, he says. That's how you run from something you can't escape. So who checked Steven's voicemail at 6:42 a.m. on December 14? And where was his phone traveling when it pinged that tower near Russell Road? December 18, 2009, Henderson City Hall. Dozens of Koecher family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, drove overnight from Utah to stand with Rolf and Deanne on the steps, facing news cameras and reporters. They announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to Steven's whereabouts, or the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible for his abduction or death. Deanne, exhausted but composed, told the assembled crowd, "We'd like to have everyone who's aware of this keep their eyes out for us, and we'd be thrilled to death to have someone take that $10,000 because we found our son." They called it a week of vigilance. It stretched into 15 years. The search began immediately. Officers and family members fanned out across Henderson, St. George, and Mesquite, the 3 cities Steven had visited in his final days. They combed desert trails near Sun City Anthem, searched the golf course, went door to door asking neighbors if they'd seen a man in a white dress shirt walking alone on December 13. No one had. Or at least, no one admitted it. Henderson police secured the surveillance footage, interviewed residents, and found nothing actionable. No weapon, no blood, no body. In April 2010, a tip came in. A former LVMPD officer turned private investigator passed along information about an area south of Henderson Executive Airport, near where Steven had parked. The family organized a massive search party. 70 volunteers covered half a mile of open desert in 2 hours. They found bone fragments. Tests came back, not human. Another dead end. Then there was the IHOP lead. Employees at an international house of pancakes in Las Vegas claimed a man matching Steven's description had been eating there every day for 3 weeks, after he disappeared. The Koecher family drove to that IHOP and ate there themselves for 4 consecutive nights, waiting, watching, hoping. Eventually another employee gave a detailed description of the man's eating habits. It wasn't Steven. Just someone who looked like him. Here's where American missing person investigations differ from homicides. Without a body, without evidence of foul play, police have limited resources to dedicate. Henderson PD classified Steven's case as a missing person, not a suspected homicide, which meant no detectives permanently assigned, no forensic teams sweeping the desert, no subpoenas issued unless new evidence surfaced. Rolf Koecher later said the lack of a smoking gun paralyzed the investigation. We've got hundreds of clues that tell us what it isn't, but not one that tells us what it is. The family hired private investigators Jim Burke and Kevin Wyatt, both former law enforcement, to work the case pro bono. They've been on it for over a decade. And in 2022, they made a discovery that changed everything. Burke and Wyatt obtained records showing Henderson police had interviewed a resident of Sun City, Anthem, who was described in police notes as excessively nervous when questioned about Steven's disappearance. That resident lived on or near Savannah Springs Avenue, close to where Steven parked. During the interview, the person deflected questions, provided vague answers, and seemed evasive. Police flagged the behavior but had no grounds to pursue further questioning. Then the investigators found photos of a room in Sun City, Anthem that had been destroyed around the same time Steven vanished. The room showed signs of significant damage, broken furniture, torn drywall, stains on the carpet. Burke and Wyatt believe the destruction could indicate an assault, kidnapping, or murder involving Steven. They don't know which house the room belonged to, or whether police ever obtained a warrant to search it. But the timing, December 13th, the day Steven disappeared, was too precise to ignore. Another detail emerged from the investigation. One neighbor moved out of Sun City, Anthem on December 13, 2009, the exact day Steven vanished. Coincidence? Burke and Wyatt don't think so. They believe that neighbor, or someone connected to that household, may have had contact with Steven before he walked out of camera view. But without cooperation from residents, without warrants, without evidence linking that person to a crime, there's nothing investigators can do. Burke and Wyatt's working theory centers on Steven's landlord, Brett Bishop. Bishop had a criminal history stretching back years, arrests for drug possession, misdemeanors pled down to probation. Steven's roommate Jordan described Bishop's behavior as erratic, always around the duplex despite claiming it was a vacation home, carrying a toiletry bag full of prescription pills, keeping firearms in every room. When Steven fell behind on rent, Bishop called Steven's father directly to negotiate, an unusual move for a landlord dealing with a 30-year-old tenant. The investigators hypothesized that Bishop, desperate to collect the $1,500 owed, convinced Steven to act as a courier, delivering something, picking something up, making a run to Henderson for someone Bishop knew. Bishop's wife later made public comments about an agreement with Steven to settle his overdue rent. But when pressed, she refused to elaborate. Burke and Wyatt stressed they don't believe Bishop was directly responsible for Steven's disappearance or death. But they do believe he has information he's never shared with police or the family. In 2024, Wyatt told reporters, his actions are a little bit unsure. We still don't know why, but he was definitely doing something for somebody else. That somebody remains unnamed. Police brought a drug-sniffing dog to inspect Steven's Cavalier. The dog didn't alert to anything. Investigators reviewed Steven's financial records and phone logs, nothing unusual beyond the road trips in his final days. The single charge to his credit card after December 13th was an automatic renewal for web hosting through GoDaddy, left over from his Matchbin days. One unknown phone number in his call history turned out to belong to the family of the two girls Steven had been helping as a Big Brother volunteer. Dead end after dead end. Steven's mother, Deanne, has maintained that his road trips weren't suspicious. He was an avid genealogist who toured cemeteries looking for ancestors' graves. She believes he kept himself busy through travel to cope with underemployment and loneliness. The Ruby Valley visit? Just Steven trying to reconnect with an old girlfriend. The Mesquite trip? Maybe job hunting. The lie about Sacramento? Steven protecting his pride, not wanting to admit he was drifting. But investigators see a pattern: a man under financial strain, 3 months behind on rent, accepting money from family he never deposited, driving hundreds of miles in the days before he vanished, then showing up in a retirement community dressed for an appointment he never mentioned to anyone. That's not genealogy research. That's desperation. 15 years later, the Koecher family still searches. Rolf has driven tens of thousands of miles across Nevada and Utah, following tips that lead nowhere. Deanne keeps Steven's room exactly as he left it. And private investigators Burke and Wyatt keep digging through records, chasing witnesses who won't talk, looking for the one clue that explains everything. Somewhere in Sun City Anthem, someone knows what happened to Steven Koecher on December 13, 2009. Maybe they saw him get into an SUV. Maybe they heard something break in a neighbor's house. Maybe they were the last person to speak to him before he disappeared. And 16 years later, they still haven't said a word. In America, we crave resolution. We need the courtroom verdict, the arrest, the body recovered from the desert. But Steven Koecher's case offers none of that. Just competing theories, each plausible, none provable. 15 years of investigation have produced 5 distinct explanations for what happened on December 13, 2009. And depending on who you ask, family, police, private investigators, armchair sleuths, each theory has its believers. Theory 1, foul play, the courier gone wrong. Private investigators Kevin Wyatt and Jim Burke have staked their reputations on this. Their hypothesis: Steven agreed to act as a courier for his landlord, Brett Bishop, to settle $1,500 in overdue rent. Bishop had a criminal history, drug possession, misdemeanors pled down over years. Steven's roommate described Bishop as erratic, always carrying prescription pills, keeping guns everywhere. When Steven fell behind on rent, Bishop didn't evict him, he negotiated. Bishop's wife later made cryptic public comments about an agreement with Steven to settle the debt, then refused to elaborate. The investigators believe Steven drove to Henderson on December 13 to make a delivery, prescription drugs, documents, something illegal. He parked in Sun City Anthem because it was a neutral meeting spot, suburban and anonymous. He walked to a house, knocked on a door, and the transaction went sideways. Maybe Steven realized he was in over his head. Maybe he tried to back out. Maybe the people he was dealing with didn't give him that option. This theory explains the dress clothes, the folder under his arm, the nervous question at the neighbor's door about money. It explains the phone pings traveling 10 miles north to Russell Road, an area known for drug activity in 2009. It explains the destroyed room in Sun City Anthem, photographed around December 13, showing broken furniture and stains. And it explains why one neighbor moved out the same day Steven vanished. But here's the problem: no evidence. No weapon, no blood, no witness willing to testify. Henderson police found nothing linking Steven to criminal activity. The drug-sniffing dog didn't alert to anything in his car. His bank accounts showed no suspicious transactions. Without a body, without forensic proof, the courier theory remains speculation. Theory 2, suicide in the desert. Steven's mother, Deanne, admitted her son was depressed in the weeks before he disappeared. Financial strain, career collapse, watching his siblings succeed while he floundered, it weighed on him. Friends noted he seemed downtrodden, exhausted, vulnerable. One investigator told reporters, "He was depressed, but even though I'm not a psychologist, he did not exhibit the rapid mood swings people who commit suicide demonstrate." Still, the suicide theory persists. Proponents argue Steven drove to Henderson, parked his car in a quiet neighborhood, and walked into the mountains south of Sun City Anthem to die. The desert offers thousands of canyons, abandoned mines, cliffs where a body could disappear for decades. In May 2015, Red Rock Search and Rescue organized a forensic search of a 25-square-mile area in the mountains near Anthem. 40 volunteers combed canyons and mountaintops, distinguishing animal bones from potential human remains. They found nothing. Here's why the family rejects this theory. Steven made plans. He bought Christmas gifts for his siblings. He told his mother he'd be home for the holidays. He accepted money from family members and his grandmother, money he never spent, but also never returned. That's not the behavior of someone planning to die. And his phone? It pinged towers 10 miles away, moving steadily north through Henderson for 3 days. If Steven walked into the mountains to commit suicide, his phone should have pinged south, toward the desert, not north toward the Vegas sprawl. Theory 3, Voluntary Disappearance, the New Life. Some believe Steven simply walked away. Overwhelmed by debt, humiliated by failure, unable to face his family's expectations, he chose to vanish and start over somewhere anonymous. It happens, people shed identities, abandon lives, reinvent themselves in cities where no one asks questions. In this version, Steven parked his car deliberately, walked to a waiting vehicle, and disappeared into America's vast anonymity. But the evidence doesn't support it. Steven left his laptop, passport, and clothes in St. George. He left wrapped Christmas gifts in his car. He had $7 in his bank account and a maxed-out credit card. You can't start a new life with $7 and no identification. And why lie to the Neffs about going to Sacramento? Why drive 300 miles to Ruby Valley hoping to see an ex-girlfriend? Why text his church friend saying he was in Vegas and couldn't lead services? That's not how you plan a disappearance. That's how you run from something immediate, urgent, terrifying. Theory 4, Random crime victim. The fourth theory is the simplest: wrong place, wrong time. Steven walked away from his car at noon on December 13th, alone and on foot, in a neighborhood where he didn't belong. Maybe he was hitchhiking. Maybe someone offered him a ride. Maybe he encountered someone with bad intentions, and things escalated fast. If Steven's phone pinged near Russell Road, a low-income area known for crime in 2009, it's possible he was robbed, assaulted, killed, and dumped somewhere investigators haven't searched. This theory requires believing Steven's trip to Henderson was innocent, job hunting, as his mother insists. Maybe he saw an ad for work, drove down to apply, parked in the wrong neighborhood, and accepted a ride from a stranger. But it doesn't explain the dress clothes, the folder, the question about money at the neighbor's door. It doesn't explain why Steven drove hundreds of miles in the days before he vanished, or why he lied about Sacramento. Random crime victims don't usually have suspicious timelines leading up to their deaths. Theory 5, Accidental death. The final theory is tragic and mundane. Steven walked into the desert and something went wrong. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, a fall, a snake bite, any number of accidents could kill a man unprepared for the Nevada wilderness. His body lies somewhere in the mountains south of Henderson, missed by search teams, bleached by sun, scattered by animals. In May 2015, forensic searchers noted the challenge of distinguishing human remains from animal bones after 6 years. After 15 years, the task is nearly impossible. But again, the phone pings contradict this. If Steven walked south into the desert and died accidentally, his phone should have pinged towers in that direction. Instead, it traveled north for 3 days, hitting towers near Arroyo Grande, Whitney Ranch, and Russell Road. Someone was carrying that phone. And someone checked his voicemail on December 14th, listening to messages from his landlord about overdue rent. The verdict that never came. 15 years later, Henderson police still classify Steven's case as a missing person, not a homicide, not a suicide, just missing. Detective Adam Olmsted told reporters in 2018, "There's nothing that makes us suspicious. But at the same time, it's a strange situation." St. George Police Detective Michael Gailey said the same year, We know about as much now as we did the second we realized he was gone. Rolf Koecher keeps searching. Every canyon, every lead, every anonymous tip. He's driven tens of thousands of miles, posted flyers in 3 states, offered rewards that no one has claimed. And every time someone asks what he thinks happened, he says the same thing: we've got hundreds of clues that tell us what it isn't, but not one that tells us what it is. 5 theories. 0 answers. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, or a shallow grave, or a new life under a different name, Steven Koecher's story remains unfinished. The surveillance cameras captured him walking north, carrying a folder, 6 minutes after he parked his car. And then, nothing. Just silence, and the unanswerable question: where did Steven Koecher go after he disappeared from view? 16 years. That's how long Steven Koecher has been missing as of December 2024. His father, Rolf, is now in his 70s, still searching. His mother, Deanne, keeps his room exactly as he left it: clothes folded, diary on the desk, Christmas presents he never opened. And private investigators Kevin Wyatt and Jim Burke continue working the case pro bono, chasing leads that go nowhere, interviewing witnesses who won't talk. In America, cold cases don't age gracefully. Evidence degrades. Witnesses forget. Leads evaporate. After 16 years, the statistical likelihood of finding Steven alive is nearly 0. But his case remains officially classified as a missing person, not a homicide, not a presumed dead, just missing. Because without a body, without evidence of a crime, there's nothing to prosecute. So let's end where we began, with what we actually know. What we know for certain. On December 13, 2009, at 11:54 a.m., Steven Koecher parked his white Chevrolet Cavalier at the end of Savannah Springs Avenue in Sun City, Anthem, Henderson, Nevada. 6 minutes later, surveillance cameras captured him walking away, dressed in a white shirt and slacks, carrying what appeared to be a folder. He walked north past another house, and his reflection was caught on a garage camera on an adjacent street. He has not been seen since. Steven's phone pinged a tower 10 miles northeast at 5 p.m. that day, near Arroyo Grande Boulevard. At 7 p.m., it pinged a tower 2 miles farther north, near Whitney Ranch. On December 14 at 6:42 a.m., someone checked his voicemail. The phone pinged near Interstate 515 and Russell Road. It remained in that area until the battery died on December 16. Steven was 3 months behind on rent, owing his landlord Brett Bishop $1,500. His family had sent him money to help, he never deposited it. His grandmother sent a check, he never cashed it. Inside his abandoned car, Christmas gifts, blankets, a shaving kit, and flyers from his window washing job in St. George. No wallet, no phone, no driver's license. That's it. That's all we know for certain. What we don't know: why Steven was in Henderson that Sunday. Who he planned to meet. What was in the folder he carried. Whether the neighbor heard him correctly when he asked, or offered, money at the door. Whether the SUV seen in surveillance footage picked him up, or drove past, or followed him. Who checked his voicemail the next morning. Where his phone traveled for 3 days before the battery died. And most importantly, whether Steven Koecher is alive or dead. Henderson police say they know about as much now as they did the moment he vanished. No new evidence. No forensic breakthroughs. No witnesses coming forward. Just a man who walked into a retirement community at noon and disappeared from existence. 3 theories, ranked by likelihood. Most likely, foul play, courier job gone wrong. Steven was broke, desperate, and 3 months behind on rent. His landlord had a criminal history and made cryptic comments about an agreement to settle Steven's debt. Private investigators believe Steven agreed to act as a courier, delivering something illegal to Henderson, and the transaction went catastrophically wrong. This explains the dress clothes, the folder, the question about money, the destroyed room in Sun City Anthem photographed around December 13, and the neighbor who moved out the same day. It explains the phone pings traveling north to Russell Road, an area known for drug activity. And it explains why no one's been arrested. Without a body, without forensic evidence, there's no case. Second most likely, random crime, wrong place, wrong time. Steven walked away from his car alone, in a neighborhood where he didn't belong, and encountered someone with bad intentions. He was robbed, assaulted, killed, and dumped somewhere searchers haven't looked. His phone was taken and discarded miles away. This theory requires fewer moving parts than the Courier hypothesis: no conspiracy, no premeditation, just tragic bad luck. But it doesn't explain why Steven was there in the first place, or why he lied about Sacramento, or why he drove hundreds of miles in the days before he vanished. Least likely, voluntary disappearance. Steven left his life behind to start over somewhere anonymous. But he had $7 in his bank account, no passport with him, and wrapped Christmas gifts in his car. You don't plan a new life with $7 and no ID. You don't tell your mother you'll be home for the holidays if you're planning to disappear forever. And you don't leave your laptop, clothes, and diary behind. This theory doesn't fit the evidence. The question we're left with. Somewhere in America, someone knows what happened to Steven Koecher on December 13, 2009. Maybe they saw him get into an SUV. Maybe they heard something break in a neighbor's house. Maybe they were the last person to speak to him before he vanished. And for 16 years, they've stayed silent. Rolf Koecher has driven tens of thousands of miles, searched hundreds of square miles of desert, posted flyers in 3 states. He's offered rewards no one has claimed. He's pleaded on television, spoken to reporters, begged the public for help. And every time someone asks what he thinks happened, he gives the same answer: we've got hundreds of clues that tell us what it isn't, but not one that tells us what it is. Steven Koecher was 30 years old when he parked his car in Sun City, Anthem, and walked into the desert carrying a folder. He would be 46 now. Old enough to have built a career, married, had children, all the things he wanted but never achieved. Instead, he's frozen in grainy black and white surveillance footage, walking north, 6 minutes from his car, 6 minutes from whatever happened next. So here's the final question, the one we leave you with: if you lived in Sun City, Anthem in December 2009, if you saw something that day, if you know anything about what happened after Steven walked out of camera view, why haven't you come forward? What are you protecting? And how much longer can you live with that silence?